The desk lamp shattered against Rick's skull. My hands didn't shake this time. My mother's handyman lunged with a lead pipe, but I trapped him in the pantry. Now I'm holding the file that proves Mark didn't abandon me. Gary the locksmith just picked the safe, but his eyes won't meet mine. The clock ticks down. 3 hours until Mom gets home. And the man who just helped me is the one who made Mark disappear. The papers in my hands are proof. The safe is empty. The only person I trusted just lied to my face. The metallic screech of the crowbar against the floor safe set Sarah Miller's teeth on edge. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight, thick with the scent of mildew and scorched paper. She shoved another stack of faded protection project dossiers into the scanner. The machine whirred, a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat in the hollowed-out silence of Evelyn's office. Sarah wiped sweat from her upper lip with her sleeve, leaving a smudge of graphite. Her fingers vibrated against the touch screen. "How much longer, Gary?" she whispered, her voice cracking. The house felt like a living thing, breathing down her neck, waiting for her mother to return and find her rooting through the wreckage of her childhood. "Steel doesn't negotiate, Sarah. Give me a minute." Gary Thompson, the locksmith she'd hired from a flyer at the local hardware store, grunted. His face turned a bruised shade of purple as he put his weight into the pry bar. The wood around the floor safe splintered, spitting jagged shards across the rug. A green light flickered on the scanner. Upload complete. Sarah snatched the original documents, her thumb catching on a rusted paperclip. A bead of blood bloomed against the white paper, but she ignored the sting. She needed these digital ghosts. Without the keys locked in that floor vault, the files remained nothing but gibberish. Electronic noise that couldn't save anyone. She was a data analyst. She knew that information was only as good as the key that unlocked it. The safe door groaned, yielding with a sharp crack that echoed like a pistol shot through the empty house. Gary exhaled a ragged breath, his shoulders sagging. "We're in." Sarah knelt in the debris, the grit of pulverized drywall crunching under her knees. Inside the dark cavity sat a single black thumb drive and a handwritten ledger. She reached for the drive, her pulse thumping in her fingertips. The weight of the plastic felt immense, a heavy anchor in a room full of wreckage. Outside, a car door slammed, the sound sharp and sudden in the quiet Seattle street. Sarah froze, clutching the drive to her chest. She didn't move for a long minute, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The silence of the office was thick, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound that felt like a countdown. She looked around the room, really looked at it for the first time since she'd started this frantic search. It was a tomb of secrets. Every shelf was lined with binders, every binder filled with the protection project. Her hands trembled as she reached for a stack of medical records tucked into the back of the ledger. She pulled out a yellowed sheet of paper, her name printed in bold at the top. As she read, the air seemed to leave the room. It wasn't just data. It was a roadmap of her own destruction. The records detailed a decade of interventions. Sarah saw notes in her mother's sharp, elegant cursive. Increased dosage of sedative. Sarah is becoming too inquisitive. Told her the neighbors were complaining about her shouting. She believes it now. The isolation is holding. Asterisk. A cold, oily sensation slid down Sarah's spine. Every panic attack she'd ever had, every moment she'd felt she was losing her mind, every time she'd apologized to the walls for taking up space, it had been manufactured. Evelyn hadn't just been a controlling mother. She had been a chemist of Sarah's misery. carefully mixing medication and lies to keep her daughter from ever leaving the house. The protection project wasn't about keeping Sarah safe from the world. It was about keeping Sarah safe for Evelyn. "Sarah, you okay?" Gary asked, his voice low and cautious. She couldn't answer. She was staring at a journal entry from 5 years ago, the year Mark Stevens, her fiancé, had disappeared. "Mark is getting too close to the trust accounts," Evelyn had written. "He thinks he can take her away from me. I've made arrangements. Sarah will be told he left because she was too much of a burden. She'll believe it because I've spent years making sure she believes she is unlovable." The betrayal was a physical weight, a stone in her gut. She had spent 5 years mourning a man who had supposedly abandoned her because of her instability, only to find out the instability was a lie and the abandonment was a script. A sudden crash from the front of the house shattered the silence. The sound of splintering wood and heavy boots hit the floorboards of the foyer. "Sarah Miller," a voice boomed. It was Rick. Sarah knew that voice. It was the sound of a man who did the heavy lifting for her mother, the handyman who always seemed to be lurking in the garden whenever Sarah tried to make a private phone call. "Hide," Gary hissed, retreating into the shadows near the bookshelf. But Sarah couldn't hide. The freeze response that had dictated her life for 28 years suddenly flickered and died, replaced by a white-hot spark of rage. She looked at the heavy brass desk lamp sitting on the edge of the mahogany desk. It was an antique, weighted with lead at the base. Rick stormed into the office, a lead pipe gripped in his meaty hand. He looked at the ransacked safe, then at Sarah. His eyes were cold, professional. "Evelyn told me you'd be here. Give me the drive, Sarah. Don't make this harder than it has to be." He lunged. Sarah didn't step back. She didn't apologize. As he swung the pipe, she ducked, a movement born of pure instinct, and grabbed the lamp by its neck. She swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed, the heavy base connecting with Rick's temple with a sickening thud. Rick's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the floor like a sack of wet grain. He hit the rug hard, the lead pipe clattering away. Sarah stood over him, her chest heaving, the lamp still gripped in her white-knuckled hands. She wasn't a data analyst in that moment. She was a cornered animal that had finally found its teeth. "Help me move him," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. Gary emerged from the shadows, looking at her with a mix of awe and fear. Together, they dragged Rick's heavy, limp body across the hallway and into the walk-in pantry. Sarah shoved him inside and slammed the door. She grabbed a heavy oak chair from the dining room and jammed it under the handle, wedging it tight. Rick groaned behind the wood, but the door held. She leaned against the wall for a second, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had the Mark Stevens file. She had the drive. And she had an address, a motel on the edge of the city. Subverted beat 1.4, Sarah turned back to Gary. He was standing by the safe, his hands tucked into his pockets. "We need to go," she said, her mind already racing through the logistics of the escape. "If Rick is here, my mother isn't far behind. You have the tools, right? We need to get to my car." Gary nodded, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he reached into the safe one last time, pulling out a small, blue velvet pouch Sarah hadn't noticed. He tossed it in his hand, the weight of it making a soft clink. "You're a smart girl, Sarah," Gary said. His voice had changed. The rough, blue-collar accent of the local locksmith had smoothed out into something sharper, more clinical. "I've always admired people who can see patterns in the noise. It's a rare gift." Sarah frowned, her internal alarm system finally screaming at full volume. Gary, what are you doing? We have to leave. I'm already where I need to be, he replied. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open. It wasn't a locksmith's license. It was an investigator's badge, but not from any government agency. It was private. Sarah's eyes darted to the ledger she was still holding. She flipped to the back, her fingers flying through the pages until she reached the expenses section. There, listed under disposal services, was a name she had missed in her initial panic. G. Thompson, private investigator, retainer for Stephen's case. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. The logic she prided herself on, the ability to vet sources and verify data, had failed her in the most basic way. She had invited the fox into the hen house. She had hired the very man her mother used to hunt down the man she loved. "You're the one," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "You're the one who found Mark. You're the one who... What did you do to him?" Gary smiled, a thin, mirthless expression. "I did what I was paid to do, Sarah. I simplified the equation. Your mother doesn't like variables, and Mark Stevens was a very loud, very persistent variable." He stepped toward her, and for the first time, Sarah noticed the way he held himself. The balanced weight, the way his eyes never left her throat. He wasn't a tradesman. He was a predator. "I didn't expect you to find the safe," Gary continued, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing a spreadsheet error. "But since you have, I'm afraid the scope of my contract has to expand. Evelyn is coming home, Sarah, and she's going to find a very tragic scene. A daughter, driven mad by her own instability, who attacked a poor handyman and then... Well, the ending is still being written." Sarah backed away, her heart hammering against her teeth. She had thought she was gaining an ally, a way to unlock the truth. Instead, she had handed the keys to her executioner. The documents in her hand felt like lead. She had the evidence, but she was trapped in a house with a professional killer, and her mother was only miles away. The trap hadn't just closed. It had been bolted shut from the inside. Gary reached behind his back and drew a snub-nosed revolver. The metal was dull and matte, reflecting none of the blue light from the streetlights outside. The click of the hammer being pulled back sounded like a mountain cracking in the silence of the room. "The files, Sarah," he said softly. "Hand them over. Let's make this easy." Sarah looked at the revolver, then at the man she had trusted. Every calculation she had made was wrong. She wasn't just in trouble. She was a ghost in the making. Gary's grip on the revolver was steady, a professional's grip. He didn't look like a locksmith anymore. He looked like the end of the world. "I don't want to get blood on the rug, Sarah. Evelyn is very particular about the decor. Just give me the drive and the ledger. We can tell the police you had a breakdown and ran away. You can spend the rest of your life in one of those nice places with the white gardens and the soft music. Isn't that what you want? To be safe?" "Safe," Sarah spat, the word tasting like copper in her mouth. "You mean silent." "In this world, they're the same thing," Gary replied. He stepped over the debris of the safe, his boots crunching on the splintered wood. "I'm going to count to 3. On 3, you drop the bag. 1. Sarah's mind was a blur of data points. Distance to the door, 12 feet. Weight of the ledger, 3 pounds. Probability of him shooting, 98%. She looked at the grandfather clock. The pendulum swung. Thump, thump, thump. 2. She didn't wait for 3. She knew that in a system failure, you don't wait for the crash. You trigger the override. She didn't drop the bag. She threw it. Not at him, but at the heavy crystal chandelier hanging in the center of the room. The ledger hit the glass with a violent explosion of shards. The room plunged into a chaotic strobe light of reflections as the light fixture swung wildly. Gary flinched, his eyes tracking the movement, and in that split second of distraction, Sarah lunged for the hallway. She didn't go for the front door. She knew Gary would expect that. Instead, she headed for the basement. It was a risk, a dead end, but she knew the layout of this house better than anyone. She flew down the wooden stairs, the scent of damp earth and old coal rising to meet her. She hit the bottom and scrambled toward the small rectangular window near the ceiling. It was her only way out. She grabbed a crate, stacked it on a laundry machine, and reached for the latch. It didn't budge. She pulled harder, her fingernails scraping against the frame. Then she saw them. The long, rusted screws driven directly through the sash and into the foundation. The window hadn't just been locked. It had been permanently sealed. "Safety measures," she whispered, a sob catching in her throat. Her mother had ensured that every exit was a trap. She was trapped in the dark, the sound of Gary's footsteps heavy on the floorboards above her. She looked around the basement, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The landline box was on the wall. She ripped the cover off, her fingers searching for the wires. If she could just short the connection, maybe a silent alarm would trigger at the station. But the wires were already gone. The copper ends were clean cut, dangling like dead vines. Gary had been thorough. He had stripped her of every connection to the outside world before he even stepped through the front door. She was alone in the dark, and the hunter was coming down the stairs. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from the floor above. It wasn't the sound of Gary. It was the sound of the pantry door exploding outward. Rick was out. Sarah huddled behind a stack of old trunks, her breath held so tight it hurt. Above her, the house erupted into violence. She heard Rick's guttural roar, followed by the sharp metallic crack of Gary's revolver. "You set me up," Rick's voice screamed, followed by the sound of a heavy body hitting the kitchen table. Glass shattered. The two men were tearing each other apart. Rick, fueled by a concussion and a sense of betrayal, wasn't thinking about the mission anymore. He was thinking about the man who had let him get hit with a lamp. Sarah saw her opening. She didn't wait to see who won. She scrambled back up the stairs, staying low. The kitchen was a disaster zone. Gary was pinned against the refrigerator, Rick's massive hands around his throat. The revolver lay on the linoleum, spinning slowly like a compass needle. Sarah didn't go for the gun. She went for the counter. She grabbed a 5-pound bag of flour and ripped it open as she ran. She threw the white powder into the air, creating a thick, choking cloud that filled the room. As the men coughed and sputtered, Sarah reached for the stovetop. She grabbed a long-reach lighter from the drawer and held it to the cloud of flour. She knew the science. Fine powder in the air was a bomb waiting for a spark. She didn't create an explosion, but she created a flash of heat and a wall of thick, acrid smoke that triggered the house's industrial-grade fire alarm. The wail was physical, a piercing shriek that vibrated through her skull and made the floorboards hum. Under the cover of the blinding white dust and the deafening alarm, Sarah slipped through the mudroom and into the garage. The air in the garage smelled of spilled gasoline and old rubber. It was cold, the concrete floor biting into the soles of her feet. Her car was there, a silver sedan that looked like a sanctuary in the gloom. She reached for the hook where her keys usually hung, but her fingers met only empty air. "Looking for these?" a voice whispered. Sarah froze. It wasn't Gary or Rick. It was the silence of the garage itself. broken only by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of a leaky pipe. She looked around, her eyes darting to the shadows. No one was there. She lunged for the car, hoping she'd left a spare key in the magnetic box under the wheel well. She knelt in the oil-stained grit, her fingers searching the cold metal. Nothing. In a fit of desperation, she smashed the driver's side window with a heavy wrench from the workbench. The glass rained down like diamonds. She climbed inside, the jagged edges catching on her jacket. She didn't have the keys, but she had the glove box. She popped it open, looking for anything. A screwdriver, a wire, a sign of life. What she found was a small, black burner phone, taped to the underside of the plastic compartment. It was vibrating. Sarah pulled it free, her heart skipping a beat. The screen glowed in the dark car. One new message. She's on her way back, Sarah. You need to leave the drive in the mailbox and get out. I can't protect you if you stay in that house. The sender was listed only as M. Mark. Sarah's breath hitched. Mark was alive. He was watching. But as she scrolled through the previous messages, the relief turned into a sickening realization. October 12th. She's checking the accounts today. I told her you were the one who moved the money. She bought it. She thinks you're confused again. October 14th. The doctor is coming at 4. Make sure she takes the blue pills. If she's too alert, she'll start asking about the basement. Asterisk. October 20th. I'm at the motel. Room 212. Send the payment to the usual offshore account. I'll keep her distracted with the missing person emails. Sarah dropped the phone as if it were made of hot coals. Mark wasn't a victim. He wasn't being held captive. He was the architect. He had been working with Evelyn the whole time, a co-conspirator who had used Sarah's love as a tool to keep her sedated and silent. He hadn't disappeared. He had just moved to a different seat in the theater. The missing fiancé was the one holding the leash. The garage door began to rattle. Gary and Rick were coming. Sarah didn't have time to process the heartbreak. She grabbed a screwdriver from the floor mat, jammed it into the ignition, and twisted with everything she had. The engine groaned, sputtered, and then roared to life. A beautiful, mechanical scream. She shifted into reverse and slammed her foot on the gas. The car lurched backward, smashing through the garage door with a shower of wood and metal. She didn't look back. She didn't look at the house. She drove, the wind whipping through the broken window, the burner phone on the seat beside her glowing like a poisonous coal. She knew where she was going. The motel. Room 212. The Sunset Vista Motel was a collection of peeling paint and flickering neon on the edge of the industrial district. It smelled of damp asphalt and cheap cigarettes. Sarah pulled her battered car into the shadows behind a row of overflowing dumpsters. Her hands still shaking so hard she could barely grip the wheel. She looked at the burner phone. Room 212. She climbed out of the car, the cold Seattle rain soaking through her shirt in seconds. She didn't feel the chill. She felt like a ghost walking through a world of solid objects. She made her way up the exterior stairs, the rusted metal groaning under her weight. She reached the door. 212. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She used the heavy wrench she'd taken from the garage to smash the lock. The door swung open. Mark Stevens was sitting on the edge of the bed, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked exactly the same soft eyes, the same gentle curve of his jaw. But when he saw her, the mask didn't just slip. It shattered. "Sarah," he gasped, standing up. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at the house. Evelyn said a lot of things, Mark. Sarah interrupted, her voice like a razor. She stepped into the room, the smell of stale air and cheap cologne hitting her. She said you were gone. She said you were dead. She said you left because I was a burden. Mark's face crumpled. He took a step toward her, his hands outstretched in a gesture of practiced comfort. Sarah, honey, you don't understand. I had to. She was going to ruin me. She framed me for the embezzlement at the firm. She told me if I didn't help her, I'd spend 20 years in a cage. I did it for us, to keep us both safe. He was crying now, the tears streaming down his face. It was a beautiful performance. Sarah watched him, her data analyst's mind stripping away the emotion and looking at the underlying structure. The timing was too perfect. The phrasing was too rehearsed. You did it for the money, Mark, she said quietly. I saw the messages. You weren't being blackmailed. You were negotiating. You asked for more money to keep me on the blue pills. You told her I was getting too inquisitive. Mark froze. The tears stopped. His face went flat, the warmth vanishing as if a light had been switched off. Well, he said, his voice dropping an octave. I suppose the unstable act won't work anymore, will it? He sat back down on the bed, his posture shifting from a grieving lover to a bored executive. You were never supposed to find that phone, Sarah. You were supposed to be the perfect, broken little bird. We had a good thing going. You got to live in a nice house, and I got to live a life that didn't involve your mother's constant breathing down my neck. A good thing, Sarah repeated, the words hollow. You drugged me for 5 years. I kept you calm, Mark corrected. The world is a loud, messy place, Sarah. You weren't built for it. We were doing you a favor. The door behind Sarah creaked open. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The scent of lavender and expensive soap filled the small room. He's right, dear, Evelyn Miller said. Sarah turned. Her mother was standing in the doorway, her hair perfectly coiffed, her silk suit unwrinkled despite the fact that she had supposedly just been discharged from the hospital. She wasn't leaning on a cane. She wasn't frail. She looked like a queen surveying a rebellious province. In her hand, she held a small, silver taser. We've all worked so hard to keep you comfortable, Sarah, Evelyn said, her voice melodic and suffocating. And this is how you repay us? By breaking into motels and attacking poor Rick? It's heartbreaking, truly. I've already called the police, you know. I told them you'd had another episode, that you'd become violent. When they see this room, and poor Mark, well, I think they'll agree that you need a very long rest. Evelyn stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She looked at Sarah with a mix of pity and contempt. You were always so cracked, Sarah, even as a child. I spent 30 years trying to glue you back together, and you just keep shattering. It's so selfish of you. Sarah looked from her mother to Mark. She was trapped in a 10 by 10 box with the 2 people who had stolen her life. Outside, the first faint wail of a siren began to drift through the rain. You think you've won, Sarah said, her voice trembling but not with fear. You think you can just write me out of the story. I don't think it, Sarah, Evelyn replied, adjusting her sleeve. I've already done it. The records of your instability go back to middle school. Every doctor's note, every prescription, every incident at the office. I've curated them all. To the world, you are a tragic case of early-onset paranoid schizophrenia. And tonight, you finally snapped. Evelyn smiled, a thin, sharp line. Now, be a dear and sit on the bed. We have a show to start. The sirens were closer now, the blue and red lights beginning to pulse against the thin motel curtains. Sarah felt the weight of the drive in her pocket. It was her only weapon, but in this room, it felt like a pebble against a tidal wave. Subverted beat 3.4. Sarah took a deep breath. She had to be smart. She had to use the logic that Evelyn claimed was her madness. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice softening, returning to the apologetic cadence she had used her entire life. "You're right. I think I'm having another episode. The lights, they're too bright. I can't think straight." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of triumph crossing her face. "That's my girl. You see? You're starting to remember who you really are." "I want to help," Sarah continued, taking a step toward the nightstand. "I don't want to go to jail. If I give you the drive, if I tell the police I was confused, will you take me home? Can we just go back to the way it was?" Mark looked at Evelyn, a questioning glance. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Of course, Sarah. I've always wanted what's best for you. Give me the drive, and we'll tell the officers you had a bad reaction to some new medication. We'll get you back to your room, back to the quiet." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the black thumb drive. She held it out, her hand shaking violently. "Here, just, please don't let them hurt me." Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes locked on the drive. This was the key to her kingdom, the only evidence that could link her to the financial fraud and the systematic drugging of her daughter. She reached out, her fingers closing around the plastic. "Good girl," Evelyn whispered. She tucked the drive into her purse and patted Sarah's cheek. "You've made the right choice. For the first time in your life, you're being sensible." The sirens screamed to a halt in the parking lot. Boots thundered on the stairs. "In here," Evelyn shouted, her voice instantly transforming into a frantic, terrified wail. "Help! Please, she's lost her mind. She has a weapon." She shoved Sarah toward the window and grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Officers, thank God you're here. My daughter, she's having a breakdown. She attacked her fiancé. She's dangerous." The door burst open, and 3 police officers stormed in, guns drawn. "Hands in the air. Don't move." Sarah stood by the window, her hands raised, her face a mask of terror. She looked exactly like the person Evelyn had described, haggard, soaked, and vibrating with nervous energy. "She has the drive!" Sarah screamed, pointing at her mother. "She's the one who did it. Look in her purse. She's been drugging me. The files are on that drive." The lead officer looked at Evelyn, then at Sarah. He saw a well-dressed elderly woman clutching her heart and a disheveled, screaming girl in a wrecked motel room. "Ma'am, step back," the officer said to Sarah, his voice stern. "Ma'am, give me the purse," he said to Evelyn. Evelyn handed it over with a trembling hand. "Of course, officer. She's obsessed with that drive. She thinks it's some kind of evidence. It's just a backup of our family photos. She's been hallucinating about projects and files for weeks." The officer opened the purse and pulled out the drive. He looked at it, then at Sarah. "Is this what you're talking about?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah cried. "Plug it in. Use your laptop. It's all there." The officer sighed, a sound of weary professional patience. He walked over to the cruiser's mobile terminal and plugged the drive in. Sarah held her breath, her heart soaring. This was it. The data would speak for itself. The logic would prevail. The screen flickered. A progress bar appeared. Scanning drive. Then a message popped up in bold, red letters. Drive encrypted. Access denied. No data found. Sarah froze. What? No, that's not right. I saw the files. I scanned them. The officer turned the screen toward her. There's nothing here, kid. It's a blank drive with a fake encryption shell. It's a toy. Sarah looked at her mother. Evelyn wasn't crying anymore. She was smiling, a tiny, predatory curve of her lips. I told you, officer, Evelyn said softly. She's been living in a fantasy world. She probably scanned her own imagination. Sarah's world collapsed. She realized too late that Evelyn had known she would find the safe. The drive in the floor wasn't the evidence. It was the bait. A smart move that had led Sarah directly into a trap. By handing over the drive and claiming it was evidence, Sarah had just provided the police with the ultimate proof of her own delusions. Wait, Sarah whispered, her knees buckling. No, the ledger, the papers in my car. We already checked the car, ma'am, the second officer said, stepping into the room. It's empty. Just some old newspapers and a bag of flour. Sarah looked at Mark. He was holding a small silver lighter, the one she'd used in the kitchen. He must have followed her. He must have cleaned out the car while she was in the room. She had nothing. No files, no drive, no witness. She was exactly what her mother wanted her to be. A broken girl in a room full of people who didn't believe a word she said. Take her into custody, the lead officer said. We'll get her to the psych ward at County for evaluation. As the handcuffs clicked shut around Sarah's wrists, the cold metal biting into her skin, she looked at her mother. You're so smart, Sarah, Evelyn whispered as the officers led her past. But you forgot the most important rule of data. If you can't prove it, it never happened. The rain continued to fall, a steady, rhythmic beat against the pavement as Sarah Miller was pushed into the back of a police car. The world was blue and red, a chaotic strobe of failure. She had tried to be the hero of her own story, and she had ended up as the cautionary tale. But as the car pulled away, Sarah felt something hard pressing against her thigh. Not a drive, not a ledger, the burner phone. She had tucked it into her waistband when she entered the motel. They hadn't searched her. They had been too busy looking at the crazy girl to notice the small, black device hidden against her skin. She closed her eyes, the wail of the siren filling her head. She wasn't done. The data hadn't failed her. She just had to find a different way to upload it. The police precinct was a place of gray concrete and fluorescent lights that hummed with a low, irritating frequency. Sarah sat on a hard plastic bench, her hands cuffed to a metal rail. Across the room, her mother was talking to a detective, her voice a soft, melodic murmur of concern. She's always been so troubled, Evelyn was saying, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I just want her to get the help she needs. This violence, it's not her. It's the illness. The detective, a man named Miller, who looked like he hadn't slept since the 90s, nodded sympathetically. He looked at Sarah, his eyes full of the weary pity people reserve for the broken. Sarah didn't look back. She was staring at the wall, her mind working at a speed that would have terrified her mother. She was a data analyst. She knew how to find the back door. The precinct had a public evidence portal, a kiosk in the lobby where citizens could upload video footage or digital tips. It was a standard feature in modern departments, designed to streamline the intake of digital data. Sarah had seen it on her way in. She also knew that the precinct's internal network was old. She'd done a contract for the city's IT department 2 years ago. They used a legacy system that prioritized ease of access over high-level security for the public-facing terminals. She felt the burner phone against her hip. It was still on. It was still connected to the motel's Wi-Fi, which was surprisingly strong even 2 miles away. She didn't need a drive. She didn't need a ledger. She needed a bridge. "Officer?" Sarah called out, her voice small and shaky. I think I'm going to be sick." "Can I have some water?" Detective Miller looked up. "Sure, kid. Just a second." He walked toward the break room. Evelyn followed him, still playing the role of the devoted mother. Sarah moved. It was a clumsy, awkward movement. She had to slide her cuffed hands along the rail. But she managed to reach into her waistband and pull out the burner phone. She didn't have much time. She opened the phone's browser and navigated to the precinct's public portal. She'd set her personal cloud storage to auto-sync the scans she'd made in the office before Gary had revealed himself. The progress bar appeared. Uploading. 12%, 24%. She looked at the door. Miller was coming back with a paper cup. "Here you go," he said, handing her the water. Sarah took a sip, her eyes never leaving the phone hidden in her lap. 48%, 62%. "Detective?" Sarah said, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp clarity. "I'd like to make a formal statement. Not about the motel, about the protection project." Miller sighed. "Sarah, your mother told us about the project. It's a fantasy. There are no files." "Check your portal," Sarah said. Miller frowned. "What?" "Check the public evidence portal. Reference number SM-1024. I just uploaded the digital scans of the dossiers. The ones my mother tried to destroy. The ones that show she's been using my social security number to open shell companies in the Cayman Islands for the last 10 years. Evelyn froze. The handkerchief dropped from her hand. "Detective, don't listen to her," Evelyn said, her voice rising. She's having a delusion. She doesn't have a phone. We took everything." "Check the portal, Detective," Sarah repeated, her eyes locked on her mother's. Miller walked over to his desk and pulled up the portal. He typed in the reference number Sarah had given him. The room went silent. The only sound was the humming of the fluorescent lights. Miller's face changed. The pity vanished, replaced by the sharp, cold focus of a hunter. He scrolled through the files, the medical records, the bank statements, the journals in Evelyn's own handwriting. "Evelyn Miller," he said, his voice low. "Why does your daughter's name appear on a series of wire transfers to a G. Thompson totaling over $200,000? Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The mask didn't just slip this time. It dissolved. She looked at Sarah, and for the first time in her life, she looked afraid. "And what's this?" Miller continued, clicking on a new file. "A recording? From 20 minutes ago?" He pressed play. "If I give you the drive, if I tell the police I was confused, will you take me home?" "Of course, Sarah. I've always wanted what's best for you. Give me the drive, and we'll tell the officers you had a bad reaction to some new medication." The room was filled with Evelyn's voice. Not the melodic, comforting mother, but the cold, calculating architect of a 5-year kidnapping. Sarah had set the burner phone to record as soon as she'd entered the motel room. She'd known the drive was a risk. She'd known her mother was a master of the narrative. So she'd created a new data set. "Detective Miller," Sarah said, standing up as far as the cuffs would allow. "I'd like to file charges for kidnapping, identity theft, and aggravated assault. And I think you'll find that Mr. Stevens over there has a lot to say about the embezzlement scheme my mother used to keep him in line." The police precinct erupted into motion. Two officers stepped toward Evelyn, their hands on their belts. Mark, who had been sitting in the corner trying to look invisible, was suddenly surrounded. "Wait!" Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking. "It's not what it looks like. I was protecting her. She's cracked. She's—" "Be quiet, Evelyn," Miller said, his voice like iron. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." As they led her mother away, Evelyn turned back to look at Sarah. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You're nothing without me, Sarah," she shrieked. "You're a broken mirror. You'll never be whole." Sarah watched her go. She didn't feel the breakdown her mother had promised. She didn't feel the instability. She felt a strange, quiet lightness, the feeling of a system that had finally been purged of its corruption. The cuffs were removed. Sarah sat on the bench, her wrists red and sore, but her mind clear. Mark was being led past her now. He looked at her, his eyes full of a desperate, pathetic hope. "Sarah, I can explain. I did it for us." Sarah didn't even look at him. He wasn't a variable anymore. He was just noise. Weeks later, Sarah Miller stood in the center of her mother's empty house. The boarded windows had been removed, and the sunlight streamed through the clean glass, illuminating the dust motes that no longer felt like ghosts. The archives were gone. The protection project had been dismantled, piece by piece, by the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Evelyn was awaiting trial in a high-security facility, and Mark had already taken a plea deal, turning state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sarah walked into the office. The floor safe was still there, a dark hole in the floorboards, but it no longer held any power. She looked at the grandfather clock. It was silent. She'd stopped the pendulum on her first day back. She felt a familiar prickle of anxiety in her chest, the old, automatic reflex of a girl who had been taught to fear the world. "I should apologize for being here," the voice in her head whispered. "I should check the ledger. I owe someone something." Sarah took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small black notebook she'd carried for years, the debt ledger. She looked at the last entry. To the world. Everything. She took a pen and drew a thick, black line through the words. Then she ripped the page out, crumpled it into a ball, and tossed it into the empty fireplace. "I don't owe anyone anything," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. She walked out of the house and didn't look back. Months later, the city of Seattle was a different place. The blue streetlights didn't look like an operating room anymore. They looked like stars brought down to earth. Sarah sat in a sunlit community garden in the heart of the city. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming lavender. She was kneeling in the dirt, her hands covered in rich, dark soil, as she planted a row of purple iris. "Those are going to be beautiful in the spring," a voice said. Sarah looked up. A man was standing on the path, a watering can in his hand. He had kind eyes and a smile that didn't feel like a mask. "I hope so," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, the old stammer completely gone. "They're a bit temperamental, but if you give them enough space, they grow." "I'm David," the man said, extending a hand. Sarah took it. His skin was warm, his grip firm. "I'm Sarah. You're new to the neighborhood, right? I saw you moving in last month." "I am," Sarah replied. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. "I moved here from a very different place." David tilted his head. "What's your story, Sarah, if you don't mind me asking?" Sarah looked at the garden, at the flowers she had planted with her own hands, in a world she had claimed for herself. She looked him in the eye and didn't apologize for the space she occupied. I'm a survivor, she said clearly. And for the first time in my life, I'm the one writing the story. The sun hit the Space Needle in the distance, turning the steel into gold. Sarah Miller smiled. The data was finally balanced. The debt was paid. She was home,